first of all, what is your life like as an artist?
I think a great many people have a misconception of what an artist's life is like. I think they probably have some sort of preconceived conception or a stereotype of an artist as being somewhat of an irresponsible type of individual, which is certainly not that way at all. And the biggest misconception is when they picture an artist just sort of lying around and waiting for some great hand to come down and inspire them, and so at that point they jump up and run off and paint on canvas, which is not the case at all. It requires a great deal of continual hard work and a great deal of self-discipline. As a result, this affects your entire lifestyle. And I don't look at it as being a profession. I look at it as being indeed a way of life, because everything in my life revolves around my work.
In every moment of history, God bestows a special talent on a few people. These chosen ones contribute to our world through music, literature, sculpture, painting, and other art forms. Robert Elson Singleton is so blessed. Robert Singleton is a nationally acclaimed artist living on a remote mountaintop in West Virginia. Reclusive and introspective, Singleton's paintings have taken him on a spiritual journey, one that has touched the lives of many along the way.
He has an aura, you can see it. He has light emanating around him if you know him. And it's in his work. If you look at his paintings, that is him.
He becomes a prism through and then paints that, what he feels. I see that to his soul, God speaking through him, through his painting.
His work continues to develop. He's just got, I don't know how often the word cosmic comes to mind when I think about him.
I know something about the painter. I know a lot about the painter. I know deep in his soul where he is and what his dreams are and his vision and his hopes.
I just think that there's a terrific link between his artistic capability and his visual and visionary commitment.
And that has come out of suffering. You know, we make steel stronger by putting it through the fire, and Robert has been through the fire, and he has blossomed. He's a beautiful man.
Robert Singleton's journey is reflected in his art and events that caused a transformation of both the art and the artist, from abstract expressionism to a spiritual manifestation of heaven's lights. But Singleton's journey has not been easy. His life is scarred by physical, verbal, and sexual abuse, and by parents who mocked him and did literally nothing to encourage his art or creativity. A youth who struggled with his sexual identity and who lived his life in denial, only to find true love taken away from him by the ravages of AIDS. Singleton's journey is about caregiving and unconditional love, about introspection and forgiveness, and demons which continue to haunt his soul.
My early formative years and my way of thinking were the darkest. But I was a child and I had nothing to compare it to. And so I believed that both the physical and psychological abuse and sexual abuse that I was exposed to in my very early years was just the way life was.
Robert Singleton's life has been full of trauma, and only through retrospection did he recognize how wounded he was.
If I were to weigh, this sounds ludicrous, between the two of them, the level of abuse. My father, I knew what was coming, and that was his fist or the back of his hand or some verbal means of putting me down. Of just saying that I wasn't worth, quote, the powder it would take to blow me up, or you'll regret the day you were born. My mother was much more subtle. Hers were pretty deep psychological wounds. She threatened me as a child, and this, to this day, I find is totally unforgivable. A little 6-year-old child who loved his mother, who would do anything in the world to please her, to get her love, would say, if you don't do this, I'll die. I believed her. I was terrified that because I wouldn't do whatever it is she wanted me to do, that I would lose my mother.
Robert's first true love as a child was music. Just a few doors up from his home, an internationally recognized concert pianist was staying. Every time she would pass the Singleton's house, she would invite the 7-year-old Robert to come and listen while she practiced.
She began to teach me to read, and then my little hands and her great hands making that great instrument sing was just, it spoke to my soul. It went to my very core. I can still hear that instrument. And she said, you're really doing well. Why don't we have a recital? We'll invite all the kids in the neighborhoods, your parents, and you can play, I'll play, and then we'll play together. Well, I was so excited, and I ran home and I told my mother and father what was going to happen, and would they please come? And we practiced, and then the evening of the recital came, and I just sat at the door beaming, waiting. I was so proud of myself, waiting for my parents to come. And I kept saying, wait, they'll be here. They promised they'd be here. They didn't come.
Robert Singleton would write, I was shy. I was sick a lot. Sweaty palms. No fingernails. By 10, I had diagnosed ulcers, bad teeth, and was effeminate. You called me sissy all the time. As he reached his teens, humiliation became very much a part of Robert's life, and a lot was repressed, things that he just didn't deal with. 3 suicide attempts would lead to hospitalization, where Robert tried to untangle the complex web of those beginning 19 years of his life. Robert attended both the College of William and Mary and Virginia Commonwealth University, where he studied art under Teresa Pollock, a student of Hans Hofmann. In 1965, he left for Florida and began working in displays at a department store in Orlando. He was persuaded to enter a few works in a clothesline art show. He sold a painting. The next weekend, he sold 3 paintings at another art show, and the following weekend, he won a first place. His painting career would take off.
When I moved to Florida, that is kind of where my work was. But I was also, at that point, growing in self-confidence. I was also a young man. I was in my mid-20s. And there had been a school that was quite large in those years, the School of Abstract Expressionism. And I've described that work as the vigor of youth. It was also sensual. And again, that was reflecting who I was, but it was strong, full of self-confidence, no doubt in what I was doing.
Painting, the actual execution of a painting is to me, a very personal thing, and usually I don't let people watch when I'm working, because there's a very personal dialogue, so to speak, that goes on between me and the canvas. And someone else in the room is an intrusion on a very private thing.
In the spring of 1970, Robert Singleton, while teaching art in Florida, was granted the first of 4 resident fellowships at the prestigious MacDowell Colony in New Hampshire.
I had gone to MacDowell the first time to prepare for actually a big honor, a one-man show at the museum where I taught. By the time I was back for my second residence, there was a new element that had been introduced into those paintings, and they were hard-edge blocks, color sitting on top of fields of radical brushwork. I was working on 2 pieces when I just stopped painting. I think I was concerned deep down that what I was doing, one, I think I had taken those 2 extremes to their extent, as far as they could go. And also, I was dealing with someone else's precedents. I recognized that it wasn't really me. I think they were the roots of my depression, but I had no idea what is me? You know, what is it that's really going to be my signature, so to speak. I had my dog with me at the time, and I'd been in my studio just napping all day on the cot, and I just decided, you know, get up and go for a walk. And I came upon a clearing, but I just laid back on the ground, and my dog was right here next to me. And I dozed off. When I awoke, I sat up, and I felt like that depression was gone. Started to walk back to the studio. There's just one line started going through my head. Are you really painting what you want to paint? And I kept answering, no. Then what do you want to paint? And the simplest word came into my head. Clouds.
At MacDowell, a new quality had entered into my work, and that sort of a spiritual quality. Actually, it started last year. There were 2 paintings that were done that were sort of completely out of context with the rest of the paintings that were done there. And actually, this year, I feel as if I sort of caught up with those original 2 paintings that were done last year. And the curious element, the past year I've been puzzled about those 2 paintings, and that there were certain, what one might call symbols that continued to appear in the paintings, that of a square or hard-edged shape and so forth. And over the year, I had talked to a number of people and tried to get some insight perhaps from someone else in terms of what, because to be quite honest, I didn't understand myself. And it wasn't really until I got back this year and over the telephone talking with a friend of mine, Father Thompson up in Longwood, that he suddenly, just out of the clear blue, gave me an explanation, and that indeed was the explanation of what those paintings were doing.
This mystical experience was a pivotal moment in Singleton's life and would mark the beginning of a long journey. He would start a new canvas with cloud-like mists rising up from the horizon. The next step of that journey was to leave Florida.
I just got this wild idea that the Smoky Mountains weren't too terribly far away. My brother met me and drove me up to the North Georgia, to a place called Clayton. View. It was 4,000 feet up, hung out over these rocks, and you could see like 3 states. Within a year, I added a studio onto it. Another phenomenon had just happened by coincidence. The movie Deliverance had been filmed the year before, but as an outgrowth of the film and the whitewater, the canoeing, that all kinds of people were coming from all over the country, all young people off from college for the summer. My house became the favorite hangout for all the river rats, primarily because I had hot water for a shower. and I also had a wine cellar. I was in my 30s. I was also well established as an artist, and I must admit I was pretty affluent. And I loved having all these people around. And I had politicians, I had songwriters, I had actors, actresses. It was a party house. And the expression out of the 70s was sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and it was Pink Floyd all summer long.
The feeling's like right now, knowing that tomorrow night there'll be hundreds of people in here looking at these things. Tomorrow night, I'll have a shield over me. I'll be pleasant, polite, and do what is required of me to be, to answer questions and so forth. But I won't in any way feel as if somebody's seeing something a part of me. These paintings are now a separate entity. They have a life of their own, and I just simply was incidental in the fact that I happened to be here at this moment in time, that I was the one that created them. They're now completely on their own, So the fact that my name is on them is, to me, incidental. They're an entity in themselves.
Singleton's art would take on an exciting new direction: experimentation with the physics of color and exhibit lighting, combined with his first love, music.
And one evening, quite by accident, in my studio, my lighting in there happened to be on dimmers. And I hung the painting up, and when I turned the lights off, they kind of didn't just go off, they gradually went down. And when I noticed that the painting didn't just go away, it kind of changed. So I started playing with the dimmer from coal black and gradually bringing the light up. Those horizontal lines grew across, and it was almost as if the painting was self-illuminating, and that the light that was lighting the clouds down below was literally coming from inside of the painting, from the center of those horizontal lines. That was the beginning of the light paintings.
By the time the light paintings began, he had reached such an extraordinary professional level, combined with his ever-increasing spirituality, really, that the works just needed to be seen by more people.
So through his connections in Washington, D.C., and particularly the Kennedy Center, he spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in trying to facilitate a showing of these paintings with music and with lights at the Kennedy Center.
Soon after the light show at the Kennedy Center, Singleton received a call from the director of the Hunter Museum of Art in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where there was a one-person exhibit of Singleton's pastels.
He said, listen, I have a friend in New York that could probably be of some assistance in getting your work exposed on a, quote, more appreciative audience. And he said, it's Leo Castelli. I literally fell out of the chair. Let me backtrack. Leo Castelli is perhaps the most, out of this decade, 2 decades back, influential art dealer. He's responsible for the careers of Warhol, Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, Lichtenstein. The list goes on. And now this gentleman is saying that Leo Castelli might be able to help me. Well, I was dumbfounded and overwhelmed.
Within a month, Singleton had correspondence from Castelli, and a date was set for him to bring his work to Castelli's gallery on West Broadway.
Of course, I'm sitting there waiting for some response, and he says, "You live in the country, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, how did you know that?" And he said, "Because your work is so lyrical." Oh. And he said, "There's the lyricism of Mark Rothko." Well, Leo Castelli is comparing me to Mark Rothko. That's pretty nice. Truthfully, just the opportunity of meeting with Castelli and showing him my work was enough. I mean, I believe that if I were to try and pinpoint one moment in my art career as being the most significant to me personally, that would be it, meeting with Castelli.
The endorsement of Castelli gave Robert encouragement and confidence to seek representation by New York galleries. Within 24 hours, Singleton was represented by the prestigious Warple Gallery in both New York and San Francisco. However, Robert was not prepared in any way for an event that would soon follow: the death of his father.
As a young person, and even in my 30s, never did I ever imagine the battleground that would be ahead of me and the life-death struggles that I would witness. So I was in no way prepared. I was an artist. I was young. I was full of energy. I had an ego the size of this. I had a reputation. I was making lots of money. And life was a ball. And the first pivotal point as an adult in my life was witnessing the death of my father. And that truly was a mystical experience. Understand that we did not get along at all. I was in my 30s when he passed away. We avoided each other. There was never, ever once an intimate dialogue about anything other than his control over me.
The phone call came from Florida that Robert's father was in the hospital dying of cancer. When he arrived, his father was in a deep coma.
I was afraid to touch him because he was really emaciated and very skeletal, and not the man I knew, not the man that I was afraid of. And I walked over to the side of the bed, and for the first time I reached out with my hand and I took a hold of his, and I gently squeezed it. And when I did, his eyes opened and looked directly at me. And I remember almost having a battle in my head that, no, you don't want to think that. No, you don't want to go there. But there was something else pulling me, not really knowing what it was I was going to say. Holding his hand, I looked down right into his eyes, and he stared right back with what seemed to be great compassion, something I had never witnessed from this man. And in my head, I just simply said, "Dad, please forgive me for anything I've ever done that's hurt you." And then that followed immediately with, "I also forgive you for anything that you've done that's hurt me," but at the same time thinking, who am I to forgive this man? How arrogant of me, particularly, I would never ask my father for forgiveness of anything because he was always right. But I forgave him. Then this battle in my head really got going, and that is, I didn't know what I was going to think next, but I was really holding back because there was perhaps something about my own sense of morality or my own understanding of life and death. And mind you, at this point, I'd never heard of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I really was trying to repress the thought, and it just came. And I said, "Dad, you can go now." I'm holding his hand, and slowly his head fell to the side of the pillow, and I remember seeing the tears fall off and stain the pillow. And I thought, my God, what have I done? I have willed my own father's death. And at that moment, his head rolled back, and he looked at me again, and I saw the pupils of his eyes contract as if looking at a bright light. The tension that had been between us was mystically and magically gone. I was totally at peace with him, and I really sensed that he was at peace with me. There was mutual forgiveness, but at the same time, I did not understand. But the irony of that, and I see that that gift it multiplied itself because it was preparing me for a mission further in life, that I would be confronted with exactly that scene again, over and over and over again. So that was a gift from my father.
Robert Singleton would discover in very real terms what death and dying was about. After the funeral, he went back to Screamer Mountain and pondered his father's passing.
It finally occurred to me that I saw him see the light, the with capitals. And I didn't really know what the light was.
Within months of his father's passing, Robert Singleton knew he was going to have to explore that event through his creativity.
One day with this pad, I was sketching, and I was again wondering, what did he see? I imagined myself as this little speck in the back of his eye, peering out through the pupil. And I drew circles, and that eventually in the first painting became a dome with a tiny little hole, which was the pupil. And there, obviously, it was the source of light coming in. And then the second one in the series, the pupil dilated, and more of the light was coming in, revealing more of the interior of the dome. And then in the third, it's completely open, and poof, you're out into the light and into clouds. So there's several things that have come back together here. The clouds are back, and they're real clouds. They're not primal gases. There is light. It's the only painting, that third one, is the only painting where I actually painted the source of the light. They were the last ones that were done at Screamer. And I don't believe that I really understood them.
I think man finds it extremely difficult to comprehend infinity. We speak of various things as in space, for example, as infinity, or God as infinity. And it's very difficult when we are finite ourselves, in that we are contained here. And in a way, this is what I've been doing. It's a philosophical approach, what I've been trying to express in these paintings. And that is the position of man as related to infinity, or space around him.
Singleton stayed at Screamer Mountain in Georgia for 5 years. It was fun, but not what he was looking for in terms of mountaintop experiences. In 1978, Robert consciously sought privacy to search for answers. He found an unspoiled natural environment, where he designed and built his home and studio on a remote mountaintop in West Virginia.
The first painting that was done here, I decided to go back in time to deal with a subject that I was familiar with, but this time with these mountains, the clouds, and a wheat field in the foreground, all inside of a circle. The next painting I did was a cloudburst. It was just a straight canvas that the sunlight was just so luminous and so bright, and the clouds were no longer gases or impressions of clouds. Those 3 paintings that I did after my father's passing, and coming here to the mountains of West Virginia, I passed through that tunnel out into the light. But there was something else going on, because I finally was becoming at peace with myself as a human being. And my spiritual sojourn began here.
Robert Singleton was to meet a person who would have a profound impact on his life, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Dr. Ross is recognized throughout the world for her research and books on death and dying. In 1986, Robert was appointed to the board of directors of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Center.
I believe Elizabeth, through her research and brave work, brought death and dying out of the closet. And now, as a result of her, the whole hospice movement, which is certainly worldwide, all initiated with her. I believe now that through her there is a greater understanding of unconditional love, and certainly compassion, and in more recent years, the whole AIDS epidemic brought forth many soldiers. People were dying right and left. And I've spoken to many caregivers over the years who, one death after another, and they said if it hadn't have been for Elizabeth's books and her philosophy, they never would have gotten through it.
But that is not all that Robert learned from Dr. Kubler-Ross. He learned to love and accept himself.
I think a lot of the psyche pain comes from denial of who you really are. It took me close to 50 years of pain and denial, denying myself. Finally, after meeting Elizabeth and being invited to go to one of her workshops, which are very intense, and they really do center, there was 100 people there, and each person, one by one, came up before the group through a facilitator, let out with the most gut-wrenching pain that was the psychic pain, and had never been allowed to express it in an environment that was, and I learned this term from Elizabeth, unconditional love. To really know that you are accepted with all your flaws unconditionally. It's not, I will love you if. It's just, I love you unconditionally. As flawed as we are, indeed we are flawed. I was one of the last people to go up. It took a lot of courage. And I didn't really know what I was going to say, what was my real pain, most of which was denial of myself and loving myself. And I finally went up and I sat down and I said, I'm going to be a little bit different because everyone that's preceded me have had these horrific stories to tell. I want to tell you a love story. And I relayed the incident of my father's death. I also relayed that I had been abused in every conceivable way. And actually a lot of the storytelling to the group was, I was afraid to go where I really wanted to go. And then finally, in front of 100 people, I said, I'm gay. Oh. I was so terrified. 100 strangers. To be myself. I was so afraid of judgment. My whole life had been full of judgments. People criticizing, ridiculing. And I tried, as a young man, to totally deny that part of myself. But I was who I was. And at that wonderful moment there, the facilitator, when I finally said it, said, you know, I think Robert needs a big hug. And I jokingly looked up at the 100 faces and I said, preferably from a man. And all the men jumped up and came over to me and, Robert, we love you. You're a wonderful person. You know, don't feel that way about yourself. And I was released. Finally, I was free.
On May 1st, 1988, Robert met Stephen Russell in Florida. There was a mutual attraction and their journey together began that day. Stephen returned with Robert to West Virginia to start a life together on that remote mountaintop. They were to meet another person who would become an important part of their lives.
Robert and I first met in the restaurant. I had just taken over the restaurant. It was a diner, and I had just converted it into a quasi-French bistro. And after having lost 90% of the business, I was still experimenting with my cuisine, and it so happened one day I made shrimp bisque, which is one of my specialties, and I tried to sell it for days, and no one would buy it. And these two gentlemen came in one day, and they ordered the shrimp bisque, and I went, oh, eureka, somebody really wants it. So I had asked the waitress to bring them each a shot of sherry to go into the soup, and they accepted. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got somebody here that really can appreciate it. And they loved it, and I rarely come out of the kitchen to speak to people, but I wanted to see who enjoyed my shrimp bisque. And there was Robert and Stephen, and kismet, whatever you'll call it, we just all fell in love with each other that day, all over shrimp bisque. Stephen was much like my little brother, but he and Robert as a couple were delightful to be around. They loved each other intensely, and it showed in everything that they did.
Stephen began working at Annie's Cottage restaurant while Robert nurtured Stephen's interest in photography and introduced him to things he had never had an opportunity to see and do. But then on June 18, 1991, Stephen felt ill and could not go to work. Tests would show he had full-blown AIDS.
Through Stephen's illness, the 2 years, and dealing with the loss of love, the eventual loss of love, was very cathartic, and I, in my own writing, started going back in time and remembered in very vivid terms the abuse of my childhood and dealt with denial and shame, which was really painful to do. But it was all because here is real love that I wanted to hang on to, that I saw slipping away from me. And the fact that as a child, I was denied that love. I was never in any human way given it. So I didn't really understand love, and then realized that you don't go out seeking love, you give it. And when you give it, it comes back. It comes back to you.
Stephen was in remission and wanted to return to Florida to tell his family in person of his illness. He became critically ill while there and was not able to return to his beloved mountains. Robert went to Florida and set up an apartment for Stephen to live in.
I was scared when we first went down there, but after a couple of hours with him, of course, we were all together, but I was very sad, very sad. And Stephen loved music as I did, and we used to dance a lot. And when he wanted to listen to music, I had this desire to dance. And I asked him if he'd like to dance, and he said he would, but he couldn't. He didn't have the strength. And I said, yes, you do.
So she picked him up almost like a rag doll and put his arms around her, and she put his feet on hers. And she's a tiny little woman, you know. And they slow danced.
I felt a great sense of peace holding him and dancing with him. It was as though I was letting him go. It was moving. It was very moving. And I think it was for him too. We shed a couple tears during the dance, but the lovely dance, the last dance. It was the last dance, yeah.
Within 8 hours of that dance, peacefully, Stephen passed away.
He was laying there and so handsome and so beautiful in his peace. It was as though someone else was speaking that wasn't me, and I remember saying, "Good night, my sweet prince." Those are the only words that I could think of. Not goodbye, good night. And that was it.
At Robert's sanctuary, there is a cemetery under a beautiful hickory tree at the top of a hill. It did not start out to be a cemetery.
Stephen wanted to be buried under the hickory tree, and which was fine with us because we could have him closer. There are several people up there now because of the AIDS epidemic took so many friends from us, our very good friends.
Stephen would not be the only one to have his ashes scattered on that hilltop. Many others who suffered and died of AIDS would follow.
Grieving for me has almost been ongoing. Never really recovering from one when there was another, and I was present as a primary care person for all of my loved ones.
One of the amazing things for me in regards to Robert, and I gained strength from him, from being with him, is the fact of how he can go through and share the suffering and the pain of so many people that have been friends of his, and be with them as they die, and that life is slipping away.
I'm really fortunate to have been part of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's center, and probably one of the most profound elements of her philosophy about life is that when it's time to go, one, we choose the time, and also that we don't die, we graduate. And that fits together with my whole belief that life is a big schoolroom. So we don't go prematurely. When we're ready, whatever those lessons were that we were to learn in this life, when we've learned them, we're ready to graduate. And I know when my Stephen was very ill and then passed, and then seeing her after his passing, I just inadvertently said Stephen died, and she said, oh, no, 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 he didn't die, he graduated. And that's nice. All the loved ones in my life have graduated. I do feel a little left behind, that if it is a schoolroom, all my friends have graduated, and obviously there's something more important that I've got to learn before I can graduate.
I know that people who are sick need people with them. They need the support of friends and family, and certainly of the church. And these people did not have that, except they had Robert and his friends. They had Robert and his family that were supportive of them. And Robert got many of these people's families to turn around and take this person who was dying of AIDS back into their home, where they had rejected him to begin with, brought him back in to have them die within the family. And so we would come here with family who had first rejected this guy, who now were coming to celebrate his life and to celebrate the fact that he had gone into a new life. And there was no sense that we were burying somebody who was awful. We were burying someone who had been beautiful and now had the peace and the joy of heaven, and no more would be judged or, rejected, but would be fully accepted. But it's Robert who's been in the background of all this.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Robert had not painted since Stephen's passing. After months of grieving, Robert began searching for a sign from Stephen, something to guide Robert with his quest for the light.
And this just came to him. And he said he knew when he was doing it that it was from Stephen.
I came in and I saw the new paintings here. There was something different about them that were not in paintings before. And there still are clouds, there's still light, but there's something just a little bit different about them.
He goes through certain moods with different colors. This was a new paint. This was a new color for him. He'd not worked in mauves before, but it's so soothing. And Stephen made him do it. He believes that Stephen gave it to him, and I believe it too.
I believe, let's put it this way, that most of my work, when I finish it, I look at it and I say that I really did not produce this painting totally myself. I feel as if there was some sort of external force involved. And I've talked to a lot of other creative people, and they many times have had the same experience, as if you became an instrument, so to speak, that another voice or another being or whatever was speaking through you. Whether you want to call this your subconscious mind, or if you're a mystic, it comes from another direction. But I really do believe that this happens to me at McDowell, that it comes from another source.
One of the lessons that I've learned in the 23 years that I've been here is that I used to say, particularly in my writing, that my work is me and I am my work, and that the two would never separate. That if I couldn't work, I would cease to be. Well, I've discovered that that's not true. But if I were to stop painting tomorrow, I would miss it, but my humanity is more important.
He's there, just like the light is in his paintings. Lots of people look at his work now and say, oh, nice cloud study. Nice cloud study. It's not a study of the clouds at all.
I can't really describe the imagery of the paintings that will come in the future. At least with me, I feel that each painting is a little bit closer, just one step closer to that heavenly light.
The light is always there, as it is in Robert's pictures. And the light is what draws us out and gives us new hope and new passion and new vitality.
The importance of love in life supersedes all else. I would like to believe that my work in some way now expresses that I can share with others that vision.
It's like Robert's work. His work alone makes it tangible. To look at a piece that Robert does explains what I think perhaps the light is, the afterlife.
I think the more one knows or comes to know Robert and his spiritual journey, the more one comes to know his paintings and his artwork. And it gives a richer feeling about them. You see it with your sight, but then it causes things to happen inside.
And I think that the themes of his work now continue to evolve in a way that is leading to a greater and greater expression of the wholeness or cosmic relationship of his vision.
I've always wanted one thing as far as my work was concerned, and that was primarily that I never become complacent or content about my work, that it'll always be a challenge to me, and that I'll continue to get upset by it. And then I think probably first and foremost that it'll always be painting will always be a learning process, and also that life will always be a learning process. I don't want to become stagnant.
I think my more recent work is, I'm really after simplicity and more interested in the atmosphere and the quality of the light itself, not so much the subject. Spiritually, these windows are portholes, and that this window ledge is in fact a step. That this wall that this porthole is in is what keeps us on this side. This is the barrier between this life and the next, and the window ledge is in fact the last step before we step off into the light. And that is the place I think all of us want to eventually go, till I become light.